Thank you so much for coming to check out another episode of the Stash Cast, where we have interesting conversations with interesting people focused on commercial real estate in the world of proptech. The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions before they occur? You can with Needle. Come check it out at Needle, NEDL.us to learn more. All right, today we have my good friend Jake Dietrich with us. Jake, I know who you are, but why don't you give our listeners at home a little idea of who you are and what you do?
Cool. Stash, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to hang out with each other this morning. So my name is Jake Dietrich. I run acquisitions and development for the Midwest for Onyx East. We're a residential developer and builder based in Indianapolis, but with 4 offices across the country, one of which is located in Cincinnati. And I've been working in the housing development space for almost 15 years now. Took a long run with Millhouse, running acquisitions and development for them for 10 years. And Onyx East is a company that we founded out of Millhouse about 8 years ago now and flipped over to Onyx East in the last couple of years, focused on both for sale and build to rent housing in both urban and suburban locations.
Yeah, I think you're underselling yourself a little bit. You've done some pretty, in my opinion, epic projects here in town when you were at Millhouse, and now we're working on some opportunities together here in Cincinnati. So, how did you find your way into real estate development? I'm just curious, what was your path?
So I grew up in Columbus, Indiana. And for those that know about it or don't know about it, Columbus, Indiana is regarded as one of the most architecturally significant cities in the country. But it's this town of 40,000 people in southern Indiana that you'd have no idea as to why it would make any sense for it to be an architecturally significant place. It's the headquarters of Cummins Engine Company. And J. Irwin Miller, the former CEO, hired all these renowned architects to come into Columbus to design public and civic buildings to make it a more attractive place to attract talent. And this is dating back decades. And so what ended up happening is you've got buildings designed by folks with the last name of Saarinen or Pei that are folks that have designed the Louvre and other world-class buildings, again, in Southern Indiana. And so I grew up around that and then fell in love with buildings and got a job doing labor for a guy that was flipping houses in town when I was 18, and then went to architecture school, and along the way did more of that work with the guy that was flipping houses and just enjoyed the kind of creation of housing, quite frankly, and doing it in a way that emphasized design and placemaking. And so I took an internship with Millhouse and back in 2011 when the company was about a year old. And I was the first employee that the 4 partners had, first full-time employee. And I took a chance on them. They took a chance on me, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I'd say so. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I knew that Cummins Diesel was there, but I didn't know that it had that. I've only just driven through it on my way to Bloomington or to go to Columbus to check out some properties that we're trying to get listings on at various times, but
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
it's an amazing place that, frankly, had a pretty profound impact on just how I approach the built environment and understanding that buildings that are designed to last and to be significant have a pretty significant impact on just how people experience and live in a place. And so while we can't try to emulate these renowned architects on every single project that we do, that same kind of inspiration really sits at front of mind for me with every project that I've been a part of.
Yeah. So you have done, as I said, you've done some interesting deals here in town. You did the Post, which you took a neighborhood that was on harder times when you got into it and transformed, I think kicked off the transformation of Walnut Hills. How did you, can you just talk a little bit about that deal and how you guys had the faith and confidence to be able to approach that neighborhood?
Yeah. So So stepping back, some of the early deals that we did in downtown Indianapolis were a continuation of some of the work that Millhouse's founder, Tad Miller, started back in the 2000s of really housing that was very place based. And so we're attaching to communities and neighborhoods that have this kind of real authentic vitality to them. And so we started in Cincinnati with Gantry in Northside, which
That's
is
right.
a
Yeah.
super cool neighborhood that has such again such an authentic identity to it. And then Post was the next project that we did, and I remember we walked Walnut Hills back in 2013, 2014 with Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation, and knew that there was something there. It just wasn't quite ready for us at that point. And then obviously the story told itself that a handful of years later, we re-engaged on the Firehouse Row property, and Post was a great success, but it took still a lot of vision for us to move that project forward. And that property, um, again, came down to some fundamentals. If you think about real estate location, you're just up the hill from downtown. You're just across McMillan from the university.
Right.
It has all of the makings of a great neighborhood. It just went through a bit of a period where it didn't see that type of investment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for a long time, Walnut Hills in particular had just mostly LIHTC development, and there's certainly a place for that, but you guys brought a new vibe to it. So that was great.
Yep.
So in working in Northside, as I'm thinking about that, and Walnut Hills, and as I've seen you do with others, and this is one of the reasons I have just so much admiration and respect for you, you seem to have an ability to work with all the stakeholders and walk that fine line. How do
Yeah.
you like how do you do that?
Sometimes it's luck you get these deals through, but I think that there's a level of authenticity that you need to start with and say, look, when you're going to these neighborhoods where there are folks that haven't seen significant change like multifamily development can bring in a long time, they're protective of their neighborhood. And so I think it's important to just acknowledge that the reality of that, or this project is going to change some things in the neighborhood, but to do it in a way that's not, okay, we're going to do this and you're going to like it. We're a business, we're a development company, we're an investment company that we need to make money, but we also want to do a project that's right by the neighborhood. And so let's have some early conversations as we're just getting to the point of visioning this project to see what are the things that you as a neighborhood pay the most attention to. Is it materiality? Is it scale? Is it a certain architectural style? What are the things that if you and your neighbors look at this project once it's built, will be happy that you spoke up about early on, and just again have some of those early conversations before you even present anything by way of a site plan or renderings or anything. Because if you get those people lock in step early on, it's a lot easier to go through the process, even if they're not necessarily excited about the change.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, you engage all the stakeholders and say, like you said, we're we're gonna do this, but we want to engage you. We're not
Yep.
just shove it down your throat and say here, which I think a lot of seen some other developers have that kind of, oh, this is what we're gonna do, and you're gonna like it, and they don't end up getting the deal done.
Yeah, and there's not a ton of nuance sometimes to what we do when you think about it from a big picture lens, but there are small things that you can do. So we can think about gantry as an example to this. If you go to Hamilton and Blue Rock and see the mixed use building that's a part of gantry, you'll notice that there's this kind of notch that's cut out from the building, doesn't kind of meet the corner of that
Right.
main intersection. That was really intentional because there used to be a railroad spur that kind of cut through that site and that at that angle. And so we notched that as a nod to the history of the site. And in so doing, really helped the neighborhood feel like we were being sensitive to the site's history, but also it was a win for everybody because we created this great outdoor space for dining for the retail that was in that building.
Yeah, I think that project has done really well and brought some new life to that particular neighborhood, which isn't easy because those folks, they don't like change so much.
Yeah, that's right.
And maybe this is along the lines of brokers and how you see the value of a broker, but how do you go about finding like your new sites? Like you and I are working on a couple, but I've seen you pull off some deals and I'm like, how did he get that? Like artistry. That was everybody called it the boathouse site. And I was like, I I couldn't figure out where it was for the longest time until you guys announced that you were building it. I was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, yeah. For most of my career, I've done development outside of the city in which I live and the city which I'm from, which presents challenges when you're working in a market like Cincinnati, which has so many ingrained families and relationships that it's hard to step into. I think we entered the market at the right time, just coming out of the Great Recession, where the city was really desiring development, and we took a chance on a couple of neighborhoods with that. And because of that, some deals do come our way because we've proven that we can get it done. And so as we've become more established, both on the Millhouse and Onyx and East side, people are seeing our ability to develop properties that are maybe going to be unattractive to some other folks that aren't willing to put in the work or don't have the sensibilities or sensitivity to get it done. Then it's also connecting with the people that are from the market, are in the market, and just building relationships and saying, here's our track record. If there's something that comes up, these are the types of things we're looking for. And it's just trying to not be too pushy, just say, we've got capacity, we can execute this, we've got capital behind us, and give us a shot. With artistry, it's similar to Post in that we had a conversation on that site 3 or 4 years prior to us actually getting in contract, where it wasn't the right time for one reason or another at that time, and several proposals came in between those two periods, but we were just in the right place at the right time to step in and take it on.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. In my world, you want to go to somebody that was going to be able to pull off a deal, especially if it's very sensitive, so to speak.
Yep.
So, how do you manage multiple projects? And maybe along that line, or even before you even get to managing multiple projects, and this is something that you were super helpful to me in helping to understand development. How do you evaluate sites and what are the returns that you're seeking? And I remember you told me, yeah, we try and develop it at a 7 cap and sell it for a 5. Is it as
Mhm.
simple as that? Or maybe talk about that a little bit if you would.
Yeah, so we really try to stay cash on cash focused, because while you do have some of our capital partners are IRR focused, there's a lot of ways you can engineer IRR to say whatever you want it to say. And so we really try to focus on cash. And in a market like Cincinnati right now, we are trying to develop to a 7 because that's a risk adjusted yield as compared to acquisition existing properties. And historically, we were on the multifamily side or built to rent side, we'd be looking at something like 150 basis point spread over cash on cash development yield to exit caps. And right now, we don't really know where exit caps are because there's not a whole lot of transaction volume to give us that type of data. And we feel like that 7 untrended return is where we need to be at for now. And then the for sale deals are a little bit different than that. You look at builder margin, which can be calculated a number of different ways. But again, we're focused on that margin on cost rather than versus just IRR, because again, we think it's a more authentic way to represent the risk adjusted return of the deal.
So the margin in the build for rents or build for sale space is all right. It cost me 300 to build it. We need to sell it for 500 as a for instance. Is it?
Yeah, and the way that it's nuanced is that we, as a private builder and developer, we take fees on the development and construction, and then also the brokerage fees on the sale because we have in-house brokerage as well. And so margin can be calculated a number of different ways as you net out those various kind of fees and closing costs, but it's still very much dollars and cents over dollars and cents focused.
Yeah. It's just a matter of which levers you can pull.
Yep, exactly.
Here's a question and that I don't know if struggle is the right word, but it seems very nebulous on the line of the different levers you can pull. Can you talk a little bit about like the development fee and how those things are shaped? Is it a straight percentage? Or are you shooting for a dollar amount? Because the way I understand it is that the developer fee is really just a way to keep the lights on while the project is going.
That's exactly how we view it too. It pays the rent, it pays the bills, it pays our back of house staff. But really, where we see the return is in the promote. And so, typically, on a for sale deal, we'll look at a deal that only has a certain minimum promote to it as a baseline. That could be a 30 unit deal, that could be a 15 unit deal, depending on the sale prices that are there. Yes, fees are important, but the promote is also a big part of that because um, we do a waterfall structure like others do that incentivizes us to perform, and that's what where we really feel where we really make our money.
So this is a selfish question, but as I'm modeling deals, is it like a 3% developer fee? And is that on the total capital stack of what it costs to build it? Or is it like $1 million or I don't know.
Standard fee that we see or that we've always used is 5%. That's on hard costs. So it's not on the total deal, it's just on hard costs. And that number might get ratcheted down based on your equity or debt partner and what they're willing to provide. Same thing on your other fees that you might take, whether it's a general construction fee or construction management fee or brokerage fees. There is an element of negotiation that happens
Yeah.
on those, but we try to hold to a 5% development fee.
5% just on the hard costs.
That's right. Yep.
Makes sense. I think we were for a little while modeling 5% on the whole build, soft costs, land costs, things like that. And that's massive, but that's what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about incentives and how you guys view those and how you've maybe successfully used those to be able to get projects to pencil that otherwise wouldn't?
Great question. So incentives is really a market by market thing. And for example, in Ohio, where property taxes are about 2.5 times that of Indianapolis, and rents are relatively the same or revenues are relatively the same, incentives are necessary to get deals done. That's why you've seen a widespread utilization of CRA programs in both for rent and for sale housing. And then there's a much broader usage of TIF in Ohio than in Indiana. And frankly, in any deal that we're doing in Ohio, at least in the urban space, those incentives are not just helpful, but necessary to get a deal done. And so I'm thankful that Cincinnati has been really smart about how they've adjusted, in particular, their residential CRA, which is they're increasing the value that you can abate versus a lot of municipalities are going the opposite way, leaning into some more social pressures to reduce incentives available for developers when in reality our margins are razor thin or as razor thin as I've seen them in my career right now. And so eroding incentives is just going to reduce housing supply, which is just going to increase housing costs.
Yeah, for sure. I think profit isn't a bad word. And the way it's been articulated to me and what I've seen in practice is that the incentive piece really essentially amounts to the developer's profit because otherwise it's just a break even proposition.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no deal without the incentive because there's no return at that point.
Yeah. And the other thing I think it allows you to do is maybe spend a little bit more on the finishes or of on the interior, but also on the exterior of the property. Because if you think about a useful life, it's probably about 100 years, right? If it's properly maintained.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to know. It'll be interesting to see how some of these apartment buildings that we're building today, what their lifespan is. You want to say they're 100-year buildings, but who knows? Stick built construction has come a long way, and there's really strong energy code restrictions now that ensure that the building's tighter than it's ever been and what have you. But yeah, let's say it's 100 years at minimum 50.
Yeah, that's right. Do you want to talk about emerging markets or some of the, I guess, finishes and let's maybe expand upon that a little bit. Like what, like construction trends and costs and things like that. Have you done anything with mass timber? I'm just curious about all that.
Yeah, so like big headline trends like mass timber or modular or things, those are all really interesting. I think are going to help the construction industry, but they're really going to help in the short term in markets that are more, I would say, tier one markets, like a coastal market like a San Francisco or a Seattle or what have you, that really has a hard time battling labor costs here in the Midwest, there's so much readily available labor that it's really hard to frankly make sense of taking the risk on some of those emerging kind of technologies and practices that it feels like we really need to see the success of those in other markets for a longer period of time before it becomes something that we more widely deploy in Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati Public Radio's new headquarters is going to be the first mass timber building in the market. And so
Yeah.
that's really exciting. It's not something that you're seeing being deployed across large housing projects just yet.
So mass timber, is that just does that just mean the whole thing's made out of wood? Is it like laminated wood?
Yeah, cross-laminated timber, CLT is another term for it. And while I've never done anything with CLT, I have friends that have done it. And there's an aesthetic value that it provides too, versus doing something out of concrete or other or steel where you've got a drywall encase or do a drop ceiling. You can do things like leave ceilings exposed and it has this warmth and this aesthetic value that I think is one of
Oh,
the things why I like it a lot. And that it again creates a more welcoming, warm environment. And there are steel components to it, but by and large there is.
it's more the fastening and not
That's right.
the heart of the construction of it.
That's right.
That's interesting. And they've done the uh the fear with mass timber was he used to have these buildings that were all wood and they would just burn up like a matchstick. And so it sounds like they've figured out how to retard the fire a bit.
Again, I'm not the expert, but from what I hear in the natural environment is that wood is resistant to fire to some degree when it creates this char alligator skin once it gets fired. And so it's not just this matchstick that I think people often think of it as.
Yeah,
Yep.
interesting. How do you use technology in your practice? I'm focused on a software to help predict transactions, which is meant to help brokers and acquisitions people. But how do you, as a developer, are there solutions or are you monitoring those things? I'm just curious about that.
I think where we use technology the most is understanding our customers. And so through more marketing and web information that we're getting from folks visiting our sites and visiting our properties, it feels like on the development side, other than utilizing tools like a CoStar or research platforms like a John Burns. A lot of what we do is old school in that we're using Excel to model deals and what have you. But just in the last year, we've really brought on Power BI as something that's kind of changing the game for us and how we extract information about the deals that we're doing. And that's made everybody's lives here a whole lot easier and simpler and frankly more error resistant because we're not manually entering and pulling data like we used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you can really manipulate data and get some insights out of it that otherwise you'd be just banging your head against the wall, even with
Yep.
Excel.
Yep.
Um,
And we're starting to utilize AI, ChatGPT in smaller ways, just still trying to figure out how we can leverage that to its full potential. And I think everybody's trying to figure out how they can utilize it in their business, and we're trying to keep up with that.
yeah, it's an emerging thing and it can get you 70, 80% of the way there, but then you still have to have that human element that, at least right now, to
Agreed.
make some corrections or things like that.
Absolutely.
So, what do you see as the biggest differences between being a developer of large apartment communities versus that of single family and build to rent and build for sale?
So
And why do you prefer the latter? Because we've talked about that too.
yeah, I spent again the first real 10 years of my professional career building large multifamily buildings. And while you make a big splash and a big impact on a neighborhood, really appreciate some of the subtle things you can do with the scale of product that we do at Onyx East, the townhouses or single family homes that we build. And there's a lot of big players in the multifamily space, but there's also a lot even bigger players in the home building space with some consolidation, especially post recession, where you've got just 2 to 3 big builders typically in a market, and they're taking a lot of the volume and a lot of the demand, and it's typically in the suburban space. And so I like being a company and being an individual that has this type of institutional experience from the multifamily side and deploying it in housing, and which is allowing us to develop properties that the big guys couldn't do. And then properties that the small mom and pops or the small builders that might do a couple to 10 homes a year, we've got the ability to do 500 homes a year. And that those are properties that are, again, often overlooked by the big builders. So I like the scale that we get to operate in the neighborhoods that allow us to do that. And frankly, I just like doing things a little differently than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's I think with housing and development, developers are often called out for chasing shiny objects. And I think there's some element of that with me, that having done multifamily for a long time, while I still very much appreciate it and still I'm very proud of the work that I did, I was ready for some more intellectual stimulation and doing something a little bit differently. And so for sale and then build to rent, which is a really a product type that, especially in the Midwest, is very new, and people are still trying to understand what build to rent actually is and what that looks like and how successful it could be. I was really excited to get on the forefront of that in markets like Indy, Columbus, and Cincinnati, where the type of housing that we're doing in that space hasn't been done at any sort of scale before.
Yeah, it is a new trend. You're hearing a lot about that from groups like yourself as well as other larger institutionally backed developers. Is there any concern about legislation coming in? I hear the current administration is let's ban institutions from owning single family homes. Is that a concern of yours?
Yeah, it's something we pay attention to closely, and there's been legislation, at least especially in Ohio last year, that was introduced that was a little bit alarming, but I think it's really directed at institutional iBuyers or e-buyers of existing homes that would be taking product that's otherwise available for homeownership off the market. What we're doing is not something that we're purpose building for rental, and so it's not necessarily taking for sale units off the market. It's just adding product to fill a need that for buyers that frankly maybe not be ready to buy something yet or want to buy something soon, but they don't want to live in an apartment complex anymore. They don't want to live in some kind of one-off single family home where their landlord is maybe one of those type of institutional publicly traded landlords that they don't even know how to get a hold of. We provide this kind of really good middle ground where we hope that legislators will continue to see the value of that and the differences and nuances of that as opposed to SFR, the single family rental space.
Yeah. It feel as you're speaking, it feels like you guys are providing for that missing middle of housing. Um,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing I would say is that we're also building homes. So the build to rent product that we do, build to rent townhomes, but our bread and butter is actually detached homes that are 3 and 4 bedrooms between 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. If you look at the home building space, there are not a lot of homes of that size being built, especially at the density that are being built, and the ones that are often being done at a product quality that I would say is largely inferior to what we're doing. And so, we're using all hardy plank or masonry siding. We're putting quartz countertops and LVP throughout the homes. And again, the homes have a much higher quality and much higher, frankly, assessed value than a lot of those other homes do, which I think makes, once we were able to talk with community leaders or staff members about what those nuances are and why this is a good thing, I think they see the benefits of allowing this, because again, it's not taking for sale units off the market, and it's an alternative for families or folks moving out of apartments that otherwise would not be there.
or yeah, the alternative is if you're in a rental market and you need 3 or 4 bedrooms and you're in a home, it's probably not going to be the highest quality.
That's right.
Um, I think so. We've talked about it a little bit. I'm doing a small 6 unit redevelopment of it was a shell when I bought it and it's all framed out. But my philosophy is similar where I want to deliver the nicest units in the market with washer dryer hookups, quartz or solid surface or quartz countertops, and then to be able to command the highest rent in the market. And not because I'm trying to be usury, but because I think that there's a market for it and demand. Did you say that's your philosophy?
Yeah, the build to rent space is being filled by operators and that are doing their own kind of core product. And that's how you can make numbers work in the build to rent spaces. If you stay focused and you're doing something at scale, and there are patio home builders that are really focused on a certain market segment that's age directed, that individual doesn't need more than 2 bedrooms or much more than 1,300 square feet. And that's what they're really focused on. They're doing that really well. And then you've got more of the cottage style build to rent developers that are doing more horizontal apartments in reality. And so you've got detached units that are surrounded by common parking areas. And we're really focused on kind of the high end of the market where it's 3 to 4 bedroom homes, rents plus or minus $3,000 a month, which is typically at or below, at least right now, what it would cost you to buy a single family home.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What are the income demographics that you're looking at? Or what are, aside from a site size, what are the maybe intangibles that make a site attractive to you?
Because we're doing these larger homes, 3 and 4 bedroom schools play a pretty big part in how we select sites. And so we're paying close attention to school districts and reviewing ratings and understanding where folks that would have school age kids, or maybe they're not school age kids yet, but they know that they will want to be buying in that school district in 3 to 4 years, but they're going to rent while they've got toddlers and just getting into the area. Employment, just like in multifamily and other places, employment is important to us, and access and visibility. We still have to merchandise that product. And so having visibility is important for us. And then it's also just access, and so whether that's quick driving access to lifestyle amenities or maybe even walking or biking, that's also really important to us. We're typically finding more of those infill redevelopment sites to do rather than finding the cheapest dirt in the furthest out county, because that's where we can build the most affordable product that doesn't really match the product that we're building.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially as I think about the projects that you and I are working on right now. It has some of those community amenities.
Yep.
So, on school districts, it's a kind of joke here in Cincinnati. People want to know what high school you went to, and it's mostly revolving around the Catholic schools. Is that as relevant in a market like this, where it tends to be a lot of private education, the school district, or
I
just
think,
curious?
yes, I still remember one of the first times I came into Cincinnati and somebody asked me where I went to school. And I told them what university I went to, and they said, no, what high school.
Yeah.
And when I realized, that's when they realized that I'm not from here. And that's when I realized that, man, I'm really not from here. I need to be mindful of that as I talk with folks. I think with the housing that we build, those parochial schools do play a factor, but it's because Cincinnati has a lot of legacies in terms of like where people live. If you grew up in Clifton or you grew up in East Walnut Hills, you might be apt to move back to that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So we may not be having customers that have school age kids, but they're moving back to the neighborhood that their families called home for generations. So it does play a factor in it for sure.
Or yeah, what I've seen a lot is people tend to move away and then they'll go to college out of state and then come back to raise their family here because it's a
Yeah.
great place to raise a family.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things I love about Cincinnati is how urban it is and the way that the 52 neighborhoods work and how the parochial school system is what it is, that people are choosing to live urban for schools versus some of the other markets that we're doing work in where people are choosing to live in the suburbs because the urban schools don't offer as much. But like projects that we're doing in Walnut Hills and East Walnut Hills right now, where you've got great parochial schools around as well as Walnut Hills High School. It's really
Right.
awesome. People are choosing to live there for high end living.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
We touched on it a little bit. I do want to talk about construction costs, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but how have they changed over your career? And I guess where do you foresee them going?
So I remember the first deal I worked on, multifamily deal, 3 story garden product that we built for 73 bucks a foot or something like that. And that wasn't that long ago, less than 15 years ago. And Now that same product probably is close to 200 bucks a foot to build. And so you've seen this significant, obviously, it's been in the headlines everywhere. Construction costs have ballooned over the last couple of years, at least in the residential space where we are in home building, you're typically letting contracts 6 months out from that work being done. And that work that's going to be done is going to be done in maximum of 6 to 8 weeks if it's a framer, for example. And we saw pullback on pricing, or at least leveling off on pricing on the home building side, probably starting 18 months ago, I would say, or at least 12 months ago. And while we're still seeing some material costs rise a little bit, just based on kind of annual increases, that has definitely tapered off as compared to what it was a couple of years ago, or 2021, 2022 time. It seems like multifamily has been a little bit slower to react because there was so much pipeline that was permitted and about to go or going, that it feels like multifamily is really only going to start to see maybe some construction costs leveling off here in the kind of forward looking 12 months, as we're about to see a massive drop off, or we're already seeing it, a massive drop off in supply.
Yeah. What do you think that drop off in supply is going to do to the existing stock or things that have been delivered?
There's a lot of supply coming, and so I think there's going to be a time where there's some absorption headwinds, because everybody's going to be fighting for the same new leases in an environment right now where during immediately post COVID, you saw household formation spike. You're seeing household formation contract now as people are choosing to move back in with their folks or just not get out on their own. They're saving, trying to save money a little bit more. I think you're gonna see headwinds with that. So I think my hope, at least, is that during that period where there's absorption, competition, and challenges, the capital markets environment improves. And so you can start to see that supply pick back up and there's not a significant lag. If that doesn't happen, we're going to be in a period of rent growth again. I'm presuming that is going to make it, maybe it's not post-COVID level rent growth, but it's going to be a point where it's going to make affordability challenges, I guess, a heightened thing again.
For sure. I think so too. Yeah. As soon as we get through, and it's not so much in Cincinnati, it's probably more in like Charlotte's and Atlanta's,
Yep.
and maybe even Indianapolis's and Columbus's.
Yep.
Um, these cities where you've seen a lot of building come online. But once we get through those headwinds, you're right. Prices are just going to rise again. Rental rates are going to continue to rise.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, but I'm still a believer, kind of coming back to one of the central themes we've talked about with quality and really building an elevated product. I still think, just in the office space right now, if you're building quality product that is doing things differently or at a heightened level, you're still going to still going to have people that are attracted to the best of the best. And so while that can't be everything in the market, I do think if you're focused and disciplined about innovating and offering something that is different than what's available in the market, you can still be successful. And that's why we've been able to closed four deals last year with new joint venture partners, because they saw us as this operator of kind of premium product that is better than what everybody else is doing in the market.
Elevated. Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
I think you're right. But early on, I've told the story before, but early on in my career, I was touring a 200 and some odd unit deal here in town. And I said to the prospect I was with, I was like, how are you going to turn this around? Because it was 50, 60% occupied. He's like, simple. You give people a clean, safe place to live and respond to their maintenance requests. You'll always have tenants. But to your point, if you're just a run of the mill and also ran, yeah, you'll have tenants, but if you then elevate it, you'll have your pick of the best tenants. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. If you are not offering quality product or elevated product along with some of those staples, like a clean, safe place to live with maintenance requests that are responded to within 24 hours, you may get those tenants to sign a lease, but you're not going to get them once they're 10 months in to renew for that second year.
yeah, exactly.
So you can't just build a beautiful building. You got to make sure it stays that way.
Yeah, it's turns out you got to manage it once you've built it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Jake, this has been great. I really appreciate your time. If somebody's interested in what markets are you looking at?
So Onyx East is headquartered in Indianapolis. We have an office in Columbus, an office in Cincinnati, as well as an office in Tampa. And those are the markets that we're focused on. And as a residential builder, we find success in scale. And so that's where we're really focused for now, and both urban and suburban submarkets around those markets. And we may grow in the future to new markets, but right now we're hyper focused on those four.
Yeah, that's great. So if somebody wants to reach out to you with a site that they have, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
My email is on our website. Go to onyxandeast.com and would love to connect with you.
Perfect. And then the last question is, what do you see as the value of a broker? And what sets a good broker apart from an also ran broker?
I appreciate when a broker treats me like a human. It's pretty simple. One of the reasons why I think we've got a great relationship, Stash, is that I think we just appreciate each other as humans
Yeah.
and enjoy conversation. And we have conversation that I would describe as transformational rather than just transactional. And when we're just treated as a buyer versus a partner, I think I'm more turned off in that prospective relationship. And I think that broker has to bring some value to the situation that's different than what we can provide because they've got a relationship with the seller, or they've got this kind of unique ability to help execute the project. If it's just somebody that's looking to make a buck and try to find the highest, the quickest buck, it's just not really something we're a relationship we're interested in entering.
It's awesome. Well,